Hello, this is Dan Housman from the Novel Cohorts podcast, and I'm here with Julie Jacko from the University of Edinburgh. It's great to see you again, Julie. You and I probably worked in the 2000s, way back when you were in the US. And I know you crossed the pond, so I'd love to hear about some of that journey, why you decided to move over.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think we may have first connected in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back in the day. That's taking us back quite some time. Um, and so I have been in Edinburgh for now over 2 years. I moved here in August of 2023 to accept a chaired professorship at the University of Edinburgh in the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine, and in particular, the Usher Institute. And the Usher Institute within the college focuses on, our tagline is um, people, populations, and data. So we're very much focused on data science, clinical, medical health informatics, and the use of data to help improve the health of human beings and of animals. So I began that post 2 years ago, and I came over because it was the right opportunity at the right time. I I really felt like the the community here and the work that they're doing is so well aligned with my research and where I envisioned my research going that I was delighted to be able to come over. And Edinburgh is a place I had visited a number of times, and it was one of those cities that remains at the top of your favorites list after you visit it a few times. And for me, Edinburgh was one of those cities. So it was a grand adventure.
So on our side, we work a lot with life sciences companies, and I think they work with us to collaborate with different academic institutions, different medical centers. What's special about Edinburgh? What's in the heritage about it, and what makes it different?
Well, at the University of Edinburgh as an institution is, one of the ancient universities in Scotland and in the UK. So, it goes back about 500 years. And the medical school itself is just approaching its 300-year mark. So we're talking about time frames that, as an American, are kind of mind blowing when you think about it. And for me, what was really interesting is kind of this bookended concept. My prior appointment had been at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Nova, while I was there, was standing up the newest medical school, the newest MD program in the United States at the time. And I had an opportunity to participate in launching that medical school and getting it fully accredited by LCME, to coming across to the UK and having a professorship at the oldest medical school in the UK. So it's kind of an interesting bookended experience of having been a part of the newest in the US and the oldest in the UK.
And we always think about data and patient data and what we can access and what we can do with it. What kind of resources have you found there, and have you been developing
Well, that's
for it?
one of the things that was so exciting about coming over that I should have mentioned in the context of the legacy of the institution. One of the things that was so attractive to me about coming over was data, in fact, because Scotland has really been a leader in the UK as well as globally with respect to the availability of data for purposes of research. So in Scotland, every individual who has access to the NHS, its health service, which would mean most everyone, um, has a unique identifier. And that unique identifier enables us to do a really great job with clinical data here in Scotland. So we have a lot of very, very interesting data sets that enable us to do some really innovative work. And it was particularly evident during COVID. Several of my colleagues just did absolutely groundbreaking studies during COVID because of the nature of the data we have available here. And we continue to have big ambition with respect to data as compared to, say, for example, colleagues in Europe, colleagues in the US. It's something that makes us really unique.
And AI's suddenly appeared on the radar. Everyone's had their fun with ChatGPT. How is that starting to leak into what you're doing? Are you
Well,
seeing
so
a lot
for
of AI projects? Is it something that's a big part of the local scene?
So for those of us who have been around a while, like me, AI has been around a while. It's actually something I remember at the beginning of my career 30 years ago. There were colleagues who were doing work in this area called artificial intelligence, and so I feel like what's happened is that there has been, of course, there's been advancement with respect to AI, but also such growing awareness of the general public about AI, and finally our ability to harness it for um, everyday activities, which I think is what's making this particular era um, especially unique. Now, the University of Edinburgh has a steeped in history with AI, doing some of the most pioneering work in the 1960s in AI at the University of Edinburgh. So we have a really deep history here in AI development and innovation. I think AI touches in one way or another in just about every conversation that I have, whether we're talking about research and we're talking about handling big data, or I'm in conversations about innovation and the development of tools and technologies. AI is always a part. It's always a part of the conversation. Um, one of my one of my projects that is at the forefront of my mind right now is a project that's been ongoing for nearly 25 years, and that is I am editor of the Human Computer Interaction Handbook, which is the handbook in human computer interaction, or HCI. The first edition was published in 2003. The second one in 2008, the third edition in 2012, and I literally last night submitted the entire volume to the publisher for the fourth edition. And what was really interesting about producing and editing that fourth edition were the changes that took place between 2012 and 2025. So the third edition and the fourth edition, and making sure that the fourth edition is fully updated. So much of that was about the advancement of AI. So when we talk about the new content in the volume that reflects what's happened since the third edition in the field of HCI, that conversation is very much about AI.
So what are some of the specific things that are happening in the human computer interaction, or the work you're doing? What are the projects? What are the changes?
So here at the University of Edinburgh, last year, a colleague of mine and I were asked to map the landscape, specifically the AI and data landscape as it pertains to health. So we convened a collection of workshops in January of 2025, and ended up getting about 85 colleagues from across the university in a room 3 times to map that landscape and talk about where are our strengths as an institution. And of course, the research that I'm doing with my team is part of that landscape. And what was so interesting to me and to my colleague, Claire Blackburn, who worked with me on this, is that not only are we leading in the advancement of the state of the science and the state of art in AI, in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the actual science of that, but we're also working in application areas that are related to diagnosis and prognosis of disease this is in both animals and humans, in treatment and management of disease, in healthcare operations themselves, as well as patient engagement, monitoring, and support. So a good example that would be in the area of remote monitoring, for example. So in the context of my own work, I'm leading a team that is, we call ourselves NEST. The abbreviation for our group is NEST, which stands for Neurodevelopmental Embedded Systems and Technologies. And it's a hub of activity that we formed where AI is very much front and center. And the premise of that hub is that we are monitoring, we're monitoring key drivers of brain health in children from birth to age 5. The premise being that there are some key drivers like sleep, physical activity, stress, social engagement, nutrition, that if monitored in a healthy and ubiquitous way would enable parents, caregivers, teachers to be able to identify earlier behavioral indicators of neurodevelopmental delays. And they could therefore get help sooner for potential conditions like autism, epilepsy, ADHD, etc. So we're embedding sensors in what we call environmental artifacts within a child's environment. Could be toys, could be the tray of their high chair, could be their bed, their clothing. And those sensors themselves are breakthroughs in engineering and physical sciences because my colleagues are experts in quantum sensing and areas where you can really embed sensors in a transparent way. They're not obtrusive at all in the environment. And we're collecting, with these, we can collect immense amounts of data related to those behavioral drivers. And so in order to make sense of those data, to be able to identify patterns and trends and do modeling and prediction, you need machine learning and AI to be able to do that. So that's a great example of a project which fits within that landscape I spoke about under the broad heading of patient engagement, monitoring, and support, because it enables families, parents, caregivers, teachers to enable self-monitoring of very young children so that action can be taken earlier in the trajectory of the condition, and they can perhaps get interventions that are needed earlier, which yields better outcomes and healthier brains over the course of one's lifetime. So that's just one example, happens to be an example from the work of my team, and that would be an example of remote monitoring and smart health. And that's just one of countless examples that I could share.
That's pretty amazing work. Thinking about it from the lens of the listeners of this podcast would be the life sciences folks. So people who are working in pharmaceuticals and med devices. What kind of collaborations either of you done or do you foresee doing? What would you love to do if you could wave a wand to be able to work with, the top 10 pharma companies? What kinds of projects would you want to work on?
Oh my gosh, that's that's such a great question. Um, and what I think one of the things that happened as a result of Brexit here in the UK is that those of us who conduct research in the UK and rely on extramural funding to do it, so government funding to do research, we lost access to European funds, right? And that's been a pretty significant challenge here in the UK. Just recently, we were able to get re-access to what's called Horizon Europe funding. Horizon Europe funding often involves key partnerships between European institutions and UK institutions, and also often involves partnerships, like, say, with pharmaceutical companies. So, Novo would be a great example of one Copenhagen-based company that everybody wants to work with. Um, and so I think that there's a whole plethora of work that can be conducted and is conducted in partnership with pharmaceutical companies, with medical device companies. In my own case, because I'm not working, my team is not working in areas of drug delivery specifically, or in the development of drug relevant therapeutics, but I have colleagues in the college who are very much involved in work and are spinning out companies that are doing work in that area. And I know that the partnerships with pharmaceutical companies are absolutely essential. With regard to medical device companies, the project where I just gave you the example of the sensor embedded AI enabled environmental artifacts is a great example of a project where we have partnered with medical device companies. In fact, the hub that I mentioned that we have formed, called Nest, involves about 65 industrial and commercial and third sector partners. And so medical device companies are interested in technologies like this because there's lots of applications for technologies like this. We've happened to have chosen one that's applicable to children birth to 5, which we know is critical in the development of children. But you can imagine there's all kinds of examples of where these types of technologies could be relevant. So we form very productive bi-directional partnerships because we benefit from them. They help us to accelerate our discovery. They help us to engage along an innovation pathway more efficiently, more expediently than we could on our own. And in turn, they get access to the expertise that we have resident in the hub partnership, but also the early stage innovation that we're very good at producing through partnerships like this.
It sounds like you'd be able to execute, given all the resources, some of the things that are critical path issues for life sciences companies in what we're now calling implementation science, which is that third hop. The first hop would be, how do we get an FDA approval? The second would be, how do we get reimbursed? The third question is, well, are people really using this, and how do we get true market access? Because just those two things does not mean patients get found who have a disease that's treatable. They're drugs that stop working and you have to get to a second line. Things have gotten very complicated given the landscape of more products coming to market that are all covering some of the very same indications. So I'm wondering about your thoughts on patient identification, clinical decision support. Is that kind of research happening? Because it sounds like it's happening in this sort of neurodevelopmental hub. But there's so many other applications where we could be going into the medical records or even bringing in new devices and observations.
Yeah,
So
you're getting to the heart of some of the big challenges that we grapple with here, not just in the UK, but I believe that these challenges, I know that I encountered them in the US as well. And the challenges, as a systems engineer, I am expert in implementation science and how you build test beds to iteratively produce higher and higher fidelity prototypes of tools and technologies you're developing to assess whether they're effective at point of care. And one of the big challenges that we have as researchers is being able to partner with clinicians and administrators at point of care to be able to create test bed environments where we can actually implement and test and evaluate the solutions that we create. So sometimes the solutions I'm involved in creating are more process solutions. So we're creating new care pathways, for example, in healthcare to help reduce waiting times here in the UK, or to help enable patients to get access to resources sooner or treatment sooner. And other times we're actually talking about things, devices or tools Other times we're talking about software or dashboards. How do you get those in place where you can determine whether you're actually achieving the gains or the ROI that you projected you would be able to achieve with that tool, technology, or process? And I'll speak about the UK based upon most recent experience. The NHS in Scotland is a very heavily burdened resource for its population, and wait times can get really long depending upon the nature of the condition for which one is seeking care. There can be long waits for surgery, for example, certain types of surgery in particular. The system is overburdened and underfunded. I think it's broadly recognized that that's the case. And as a result, the system tends to be more risk averse because they're simply trying to deliver care given the state of the sector and the resources that they have to work with. And so one of the things that we're working on, the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine is working in partnership with NHS Lothian, which is the NHS here in Edinburgh, and in particular the Royal Infirmary, which happens to be co-located with where the Usher Institute is, to focus in areas that are big pain points for the NHS, to see if we might be able to, through some exemplar projects, successful exemplar projects, enable some of these advancements and inventions to be embedded in the test bed environment, enabling us to more quickly traverse that innovation pathway that needs to be traversed. Now, we're fortunate in the Usher Institute, we have a clinical trials unit, the Edinburgh Clinical Trials Unit, which is very nice to have as part of the organization because it does enable our clinical academics as well as our non-clinical academics to work hand in hand with people who are experts at setting up academic clinical trials. And that also enables us to engage in innovation effectively.
So what are you most excited about in
Hmm.
terms of, what you're working on, what you can work with life sciences companies? What's exciting these days?
I think what is most exciting to me right now in this moment was, first of all, shipping that handbook off to the publisher. That felt pretty darn good, I have to say. And I should give a shout out to the fact that there are 59 chapters in that handbook, and there's like 155 authors from 21 countries who contributed. So it's
Wow.
been a massive community effort within the HCI community to bring that together, which has been really, it's genuinely one of the most rewarding things I've done over the course of my career. So I'm very excited about that. And that's something that'll be published in 2026. So I'll let you know when that's out. You can check that out. Maybe we could do another
Yeah,
conversation
we
at
can
that
talk
point.
about the highlights
Exactly.
of the human computer interaction handbook,
Exactly.
right?
Um, but the Nest project that I spoke to you about is one of the things that's also really front and center, and it's something that I'm immensely excited about. It's one of the most collaborative teams I've ever led, have ever been a part of. I think one of the things that makes the team so exciting is its diversity. The fact that um, I'm a systems engineer by training, working within a medical school on grand challenges in population health. And the people on the team I'm working with scientists and engineers. I'm working with physicians who are expert in pediatrics, experts in neurology, and people who are informaticists, so focused on data science. It's just a really diverse collection of academics, but it's equally complemented by the diversity of the industrial, commercial, and third sector partners that we have involved in the hub. So it's just one of these unicorns that is highly collaborative, can have really big impact. We have big ambition. We're competing for significant external funding. And I think the opportunity to work with companies who believe in the mission and recognize the value and the diversity of the expertise and are able to invest at one level or another is it's magical. I mean, that's the magic happens at the intersection of disciplines and sectors always.
So I'm curious with the Nest, because I know the life sciences companies, they're trying to figure out how to sub-segment some of these diseases that have broad categories, like epilepsy.
Mhm.
At least one conversation I've had has been, well, epilepsy might be 25, 30 different diseases if you think about it from what you're going to treat them with in terms of
Mhm.
drugs, because if we're thinking pharmaceuticals, um, do you think that there's going to be genetic information you're collecting in this hub? Is there going to be ways to tease out the different subtypes of these disorders using all this extra data?
So at the moment, we are focused on behavioral markers because at those ages, behavioral markers can tell us a lot about what's happening with respect to a child or an infant's neurodevelopment. So we're beginning with behavioral markers, but there's no reason that it would not progress to biomarkers and genetic markers, and then being able to pair up or combine a variety of markers to have even more precise indicators of what's happening. And
Because yeah, because
that's where the power lies. Yeah.
I can imagine like there's always this interesting question of the FDAs of the world. They like good markers, and they're a little more distrustful of behavioral markers because they can't judge a drug's efficacy based on someone's observation as easily. So
True.
obviously, I think there's going to be an interest in the true biomarkers. I mean, obviously, anything could be a biomarker, but if it looks like a lab test or it looks like a genetic test, you suddenly have this definitive answer of the levels beyond the normal range, or this is, a loss of function for this gene. So
Yep.
it could be interesting as you get there, um,
I
to,
think
to
that the
to
reason we
combine these
focus
things.
you're absolutely right. And the reason that we went the route of focusing on behavioral markers first is because it enables self-management. And so our focus was, can we enable as much as possible to happen in these home environments or school environments or carer environments with respect to detection of abnormalities or challenging behaviors that they may go undetected or unnoticed for some time. So the premise initially is to enable the earlier detection of behaviors that are indicative of something bigger. And so the natural progression then would be to enable this to happen in these community type settings, home and community settings, and then pair them with what can happen in clinical and hospital settings.
Well, certainly, there's a lot that could be taken from it and translated into projects that will be sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. You know, it might look
Mhm.
different, I think, in
Mhm.
that, for example, if someone has a psoriasis drug, they're looking at, when did someone fail their first line therapy? And I think a big question that often comes up is where are we going to get all these observations that a patient's not doing well after they've already been treated with something?
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
may not be in the medical record, or it may be in the medical record. I'm hoping we're getting better at bringing information from the patient into the medical context, because that I think is a big gap.
It's a huge gap. You're absolutely right. And it's a huge gap at those early stages, those birth to 5 year stage. And so you're right that there's huge value in that.
So it would be interesting to see also how you think about scaling. So let's say it all works in the lab. How you get this working in the US and in the rest of the UK or the rest of Europe? How are you going to pull that off?
It's going to take big investment. So I really think that I mean, the scaling is essential. And so we're beginning regionally. We're forming a partnership, which is Scotland and UK centric to begin. And we're working with third sector partners who are youth serving partners, partners who specialize, especially working with children who have neurodevelopmental delays or who are neurodiverse. And I think that scaling can happen through those partners. So therein lies the strength of those partnerships. And then ultimately, if you can demonstrate success in those environments through partners, we work hand in hand with the commercial arm of the University of Edinburgh. It's called Edinburgh Innovations. And the folks who are working in Edinburgh Innovations to support things like spin outs and other types of entrepreneurial activity within the university, they're expert at doing that. So we work hand in hand with them to ensure that we can actually engage and scale up and spin out and bringing these types of tools and technologies to broader audiences globally.
Sounds really exciting. I know I've taken a lot of your time. It's been wonderful chatting. Any parting thoughts or big ideas you see for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think despite all of our talk about AI and tech advancement and all the ways that our world is changing so quickly in that realm, I think it's important. It's important to emphasize some of the statements I made earlier when you asked what's really exciting me right now. What excites me the most is the collaboration and interaction and engagement among the in my case the members of my team who are all focused on making a difference in that early childhood age group. And it really still really comes down to working together and working together on shared interests and shared goals. And I think that's true between nations as well. That collaborative spirit, that can-do spirit, that spirit of if we win, you win mentality. And I think it's important to restate that or remind ourselves of that.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Julie, and look forward to talking maybe in 2026 when you have the book out, which should
My
be not
pleasure.
too far away. And we'll obviously no one can read the current version, the one that's for 2026 for another few months, but it may be an interesting work in the context of the kind of projects we're all trying to do. So,
I really look forward to that. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it.
all right, thanks, Julie.